Hi, Angie Power Disney here, Angela Power Disney. Continuing with the audio reading, occasionally edited with emotion, of Children for the Devil, Satanic Abuse and Ritual Crime by Tim Tate, a British author. In chapter 7, I covered some cases that he covered some cases, including the McMartin Preschool and the Broxtowe estate in Nottingham. So we'll go on to chapter 8. So, right, screen share. There we go, chapter 8. I must get a bit of a slow start here, but we'll get there. Let's try this. Just kind of calms and grounds me to have some music on. My son says it sounds cultish. Some of it's just pure Gregorian chant music, but in a way, he is describing it correctly. Because in many ways, the upper echelons of the Catholic and Greek Orthodox Church are a cult. Anyway, back to chapter 8. It says this is where they buried the cases in the 80s, covered it up, calling it Satanic Panic. It was a very orchestrated operation by mainstream media and the judiciary and academics to cover it up. Perpetual holy war. Quote, witch hunt is launched over books and TV. Satan's Care Bears banned. Interesting. Headlines in the Independent on Sunday, October 28th, 1990. In September 1990, Christopher Bray, occultist, entrepreneur, and self-appointed savior of the pagan world, mailed to his customers a new call to arms, an invitation to embark upon a new age jihad in defense of their rights of worship. Occult belief and practice, he thundered, were under attack from accounts of satanic ritual abuse. This is the greatest confidence trick of modern times. Sorry, I'm just wondering about my random selection of music. This is the greatest confidence trick of modern times. Religious extremists have deluded millions of Britons by massaging their bigotries and prejudices. How were a handful of warped people able to create a nationwide terror which bound up government, police, and social services in utterly futile investigations without which is a quote, right, without a shred of evidence to support their allegations? And why are the authorities still, even now, giving credence to their discredited allegations? Wow. Which reminds me of the hoi polloi defending Leon Britton and Harvey Procter, etc. The answer, according to Bray, was that there was an international conspiracy to persecute perfectly peaceful and law-abiding pagans. A conspiracy that took in all levels of government agencies, press, television, and therapists. Behind it were a shadowy collection of fundamentalist Christians determined to manipulate unsuspecting children for their own sinister purposes. Wow. This is, of course, paranoid gibberish. But then, so is the opposite view, shared by many evangelical Christians, that there's an international conspiracy of Satanists who are busy taking over the planet. Well, that might not be such a far-flung theory, actually. I think this author, myself and Craig McGowan agree, has a bugbear about fundamental Christians. So I don't know if that's part of his own experience or... But anyway, continuing. The truth is that the rival paranoias of pagans and priests have created their own war, a war in which children's quite genuine disclosures of satanic ritual abuse are either abused or discarded as the battle rages on. And as with all wars, truth in the pages of the newspapers or in television reporting is one of the first casualties. The aim of this chapter is to untangle the history of the conflict and show how ill-considered evangelical battle cry led to a misinformed pagan backlash, which in turn helped create a canon of entirely inaccurate reporting. The final result was an apparently insoluble public confusion. Christians and the occult. Maureen Davies is tall, Welsh, and approaching middle age. Desperately sincere in her Christianity, she has claimed to have been involved on the outer fringes of a Wiccan coven and to have been abused as a child. She brought both alleged experiences to bear on the vocation she adopted in 1987, director and full-time caseworker for the Evangelical Alliance's new mission to the occult, Reach Out. Quote, Reach Out Trust is a Christian organization. Part of its work is to help those people who are trapped in the occult, and we cooperate with other agencies in this. I head up the occult side of the work on a national level, and this work can be divided into 3 parts. A, to monitor the occult problem in this country by doing research into this field, where necessary, taking action against some activities and teaching others how to do this. B, to come alongside and give support to victims and their families, to encourage, counsel, and share with them the different avenues they can pursue. C, to challenge and educate the church about the problems of the occult and ritual abuse. Millions of pounds are spent on the occult every year in this country and abroad. There are hundreds of occult products listed in their mail order catalogues, tarot cards, Ouija boards, and satanic ritual regalia. Some are also involved in pornography and drug dealing. Most of the satanic groups, if not all, are networked with other groups in this country, Europe, and the rest of the world, in particular, America. The subject of the occult is vast and varied. Occult shops are opening up everywhere and under many banners. For example, they are sometimes called New Age centers or alternative lifestyle shops or just plain occult shops. These shops can be open recruiting grounds for satanic or witchcraft groups, preying on the minds of teenagers, especially those craving power and control of others, or those who are lacking in self-esteem and worth, thinking power will give them a boost. Who would want to have a girlfriend through manipulation that is not love? The occult openly distorts the truth and undermines the security of family life. We have to act. We are not saying that everyone involved in witchcraft is molesting children, but unfortunately, there are groups that do. In this privately circulated 1989 pamphlet, Maureen Davies set out the evangelical case against the occult. It was, she concluded, a broad church, everything from neo-pagans to cannibalistic Satanists, and the one quite frequently led to the other. The problem with this argument is that it is simply not sustainable, nor indeed was Davies's research anything more reliable than unchecked and indeed uncheckable rumour and accusation. Nonetheless, the Evangelical Alliance, Reach Out's parent organisation, set about pursuing a new crusade against all things occult. All non-Christian religions or superstitions were linked in this analysis. Witchcraft was an umbrella term, a sinister blot on the world, in whose shadows lurked everything from clairvoyance to child abuse in the name of Satan. Unfortunately, EA appeared unable to determine what precisely that religion was. Its pamphlets and educational packs lumped horoscopes, Halloween, spiritualism, and tarot cards under the one banner of witchcraft. There was no mention of the existence of the definable and historic religion of Wicca, the real base of modern witchcraft as opposed to Satanism, much less a realization that only Halloween and some aspects of the tarot have any faint relationship to it. Instead, the EA's concept of witchcraft was an all-embracing, non-Christian distraction into the path of evil. Quote, a neighborhood seance, an astrologer's telephone helpline, Teenagers' fun with Ouija boards. I don't think it's fun. I had a horrific experience. These seemingly innocent entertainments could be entrances to a sinister world of evil and destruction. I agree. Involvement with the supernatural through tarot cards, Ouija boards, and spiritism is inflicting mental, spiritual, and physical damage on growing numbers of people, many of them still at school. And seemingly trivial activities such as horoscopes and Halloween parties can be part of the process. While there's no evidence of anyone having been hurt through checking their stars in the entertainment media, there is a danger that for some, this will create an interest in seeking to know their future through more direct occult involvement. As the Reverend Tom Walker says in his book, The Occult Web, a strong fascination with astrology can bring anyone into bondage and fear. I think that's true. Witches are real. There are real witches in this country today. They don't wear pointed hats and ride broomsticks, but they have been tricked into following Satan. At Halloween, they pray to Satan and they enjoy evil. That's a quote. The message of this highly inaccurate leaflet, according to the author, Tim Tate, boldly entitled Doorways to Danger, was clear. Any form of occultism was the top of a slippery slope into the madness of witchcraft. And to be sure that its audience understood the nature of that religion, the EA subsequently issued a press release with an explicit warning from its general director, Reverend Clive Calver. Quote, witchcraft and spells may be fun as long as they remain fiction. But when reality rears its ugly head and children are abused on the altars of pagan gods, then the church and society must respond. I agree. The EA was not alone in spreading its message. Maureen Davies worked closely with American evangelical groups, regularly exchanging, quote, intelligence with Larry Jones's Cult Crime Network, Inc., and the growing number of ad hoc and amateur, quote, support groups for ritual abuse victims in Britain. Among the best organized of these, my music's gone off, but that was a bit random. And to be fair, the least amateurish was Diane Corr's Child Watch organization. Throughout 1988 and 1989, Corr regularly turned up in the press, on television, or at public meetings to push the Witchcraft Satanic International conspiracy line. Well, that looks interesting. Right. She, like Davies, seemed to make little attempt to distinguish between the religions.
You know, each and every one of us were created by God to live in a relationship with God. It turns out that the God of...
Right. Here we go, try this. I think I might have used this earlier. Sorry, guys, I have ADHD. Okay. Throughout 1988 and 1989, Corr regularly turned up in the press. Here, I read that. She, like Davies, seemed to make little attempt to distinguish between the religions. Corr's motivation was not primarily spiritual. She was and remains a passionate and caring advocate for children who have suffered. Her concern is genuine, her efforts tireless and unstinting. Yet she shared with Maureen Davies one fatal trait. Ritual abuse, quote, fact to both women was established when one apparent survivor gave them a new detail, incident, or allegation. No matter that these were generally impossible to verify, the mere voicing of a word or phrase was enough to establish that as a solid pillar of their, quote, research. Just such an example was the so-called, quote, Scorpio and, quote, devilfish satanic child abuse rings. I read a little bit about Scorpio on Spotlight blog. Corr first heard the names of the groups in Hull and Newcastle, respectively. Quote, Scorpio was the name Matthew, the teenage rent boy whose case brought Child Watch and Humberside social workers into conflict in 1988, had put to the group of his abusers. Anxious to find supporting evidence, Corr routinely asked those who sought her help if they had heard of it. Occasionally, one or two children would say they had, and the therapist would typically, quote, share her existing information about Scorpio with them. From such contaminated and uncertain evidence did Child Watch build a conspiracy theory. Quote, Devilfish originated in information supplied by a Tyneside church worker. He rang Core to tell her about two teenage girls who had come to him several years previously with a strange story of sex rights and drug taking in the name of Satanism. The girls said the group involved was known as Devilfish, but by the time Core took his call, both girls had disappeared. Undeterred, Diane Core pressed every survivor or parent she met for information. By suggesting the names to those contacts, she had effectively made any confirmations evidentially worthless. One of those she spoke to was Janie, the South London mother whose family, Child Watch, relocated in Hull. Janie put the names to Laura and Bobby. Some vague confirmation emerged, and the information was passed back to Core. Throughout 1988 and the first half of 1989, Scorpio, quote, and Devilfish, quote, became unshakable fixtures in the apparent firmament of satanic groups preying on children in Britain. By the time Core met up with Natalie and Kitty, they had assumed a disproportionate status in her eyes. Inevitably, given the feverish paranoia under which she worked, Core somehow assumed that Natalie's abusers were part of the same organization. In March 1989, she traveled to America on a lecture tour sponsored by Lyndon LaRouche's New Federalist magazine. Core had already established firm links with his German-based publication, Executive Intelligence Review, and absorbed something of both its obsession with the OTO and its own escalated paranoia. When she spoke in Europe under its auspices, she traveled with an armed bodyguard. The speech Diane Core gave in Atlanta, Georgia, that March was the epitome of the evangelical-inspired conspiracy theory. It also recklessly identified Natalie by using her real name and discussing the forthcoming Old Bailey trial. Quote, the group Natalie, this pseudonym did not appear in the speech, was in Devilfish, was a subsidiary of a group called OTO, Ordo Templi Orientis, which was started by Aleister Crowley. He initiated a lot of very high-ranking people into this organization, and it became very powerful and still is very powerful. It is a very dangerous organization. Let's go through the facts of Natalie's case. The first fact is that human remains were found in a house where Natalie lived with her grandmother. The second fact is that she is so badly mutilated inside that she won't ever be able to have children. It is an indication of Core's regard for the, quote, facts that none of those statements concerning Natalie are true. The girl had never heard of, quote, Devilfish, much less confided its name to Core. No human remains were ever found anywhere at any time during the investigation into her case, and happily, Natalie has every prospect of successfully having as many children as she wants. Core's speech was dutifully recorded on videotape and transcribed by her enthusiastic hosts. Both were made available via mail order by the end of March. Now, this person they're referring to as Natalie and is sometimes referred to as Teresa has since gone public. I've shared the link in one of these chapters, description box. And if you are out there, do contact me. I would love to talk to you and see if you went on to have a family, how you're doing, and if you had adequate and appropriate support for recovering from satanic ritual abuse. So the details she gave not only put in jeopardy her forthcoming trial, but more seriously made Natalie vulnerable by disclosing her identity. It was a stunningly irresponsible act. It is of course entirely possible that such groups as, quote, Scorpio and, quote, Devilfish exist. It is theoretically possible that they may indeed be affiliated to the Ordo Templi Orientis. The problem with Core and Davies is not so much that they have no evidence upon which to base their allegations, but that in parading these stories around the world in such cavalier fashion, they contaminate an unknown number of children's disclosures. Quote, the Atlanta speech, before I quote, the Atlanta speech also found cause spreading the message about the evils of witchcraft. Quote, and I would say I still have no confidence in the courts doing the right thing anyway. So the Old Bailey, the Royal Courts of Justice, the full courts, doesn't seem wherever you go that you get a good outcome. Forgive me for my cynicism. Right. Quote, now, concerning recruitment to satanic abuse cults, teachers infiltrate the schools and start to teach your children history lessons about witches and paganism and the occult. You got after-school recruitment, where teachers will take pubescent children at an extracurricular lesson and start talking quite casually about Ouija boards, tarot cards, herbalism, and other kinds of off-the-wall things. And the children are naturally curious, as you know. The Satanist loves this natural curiosity. He really hones in on it and makes a meal of it. Part of the satanic technique, according to this analysis, was heavy metal rock music. Core was about to educate her listeners with the second strand of the evangelical assault on all things occult. Quote, the next thing I have to tell you is quite unusual. You would think it was unusual, but kids are being recruited through rock music, through heavy metal. Have you ever been upstairs to your son's bedroom to read the words on these heavy rock records? It is horrifying. Brainwashing, and it's stored in the subconscious to emerge if the child becomes hooked on the stuff in quite catastrophic ways. So what can we do? I know what we can do. We must become one loud voice, a choir of Christianity, whose collective voice will drown out the voice of Satan, who will smash his trumpet of victory, never to be heard again. That collective voice found expression in 1991 when Child Watch's longtime patron, the conservative Geoffrey Dickens, introduced an amendment to the Criminal Justice Bill as it progressed through Parliament. If accepted, and it is almost certain not to be, the clause would make illegal child participation in witchcraft and paganism in all its forms, as well as Satanism itself, would make it illegal. Dickens could not distinguish between Satanism and Wicca, let alone between malefic and non-malefic devil worship. I don't see how there could be non-malefic devil worship. Quote, I don't want children getting involved in witchcraft, whether it's paganism or black witchcraft. What I object to is children being ensnared and corrupted and enticed into witchcraft, which I think is totally unhealthy and is leading to many sinister things. There is, as with all good conspiracy theories, a germ of true fact underlying all this evangelical eyewash. Triggered much, Tim. Without doubt, some of those attracted to the occult do progress from Wicca to Satanism. David Austin, the British representative and high priest of the Temple of Set, was one such. Quote, for me, it was just a gradual development. I found conventional religion didn't really answer what I was looking for. I wanted a bit of excitement, something slightly different, something that gave me an experience. I started off with witchcraft and then the various branches of ritual magic. Gradually, I drifted into what is basically black magic, the left-hand path, Satanism. The key to the reality of the supposed slippery slope to Satanism is contained in what Austin said. He was, in any event, looking for the thrills and spills of satanic worship, having tired of conventional Christian religion. There is no empirical cause and effect data to prove the slippery slope hypothesis that Dickens, Core, and EA advance. The same holds true for the evangelical approach to rock music. We've seen already that performers like Ozzy Osbourne use a smattering of satanic imagery to sell their product, and without doubt some teenagers are badly affected by it. The case of Andrew Newell illustrated that. Equally, there are some bands whose music, lyrics, and beliefs are evocative of child abuse in quasi-occult circumstances. The Temple of Physic Youth is a loose-knit London-based organisation formed around a rock band called Psychic TV. Videos of the band's performances, sold with accompanying text from the temple, clearly show it to be heavily influenced by Crowley. There is a suggestion of child sex, or at least of children present during adult sex, in rituals which take place during the performances. But however nasty it might be, and the Obscene Publications branch was in October 1990 examining TOPY's material for potential violation of the indecency laws, there is no reliable evidence to support the contention that satanic rock music is part of an international recruitment campaign amongst pubescent teenagers. The final strand in the evangelical argument, linking Satanism and child abuse to less extreme occult religions, is a little better grounded. Campaigners like Maureen Davies and Diane Corr point to occult bookshops and mail-order businesses as the major suppliers of satanic texts and paraphernalia. This is unquestionably true. Chris Bray's Sorcerer's Apprentice sells all that the budding Satanist needs to begin a life of devil worship. But such is the hysteria surrounding the evangelical campaign that occultists like Bray have closed ranks and denounced even genuine evidence of ritual abuse as part of a Christian witch hunt. Occultists and ritual abuse. In October 1989, a neo-pagan known variously as Jeremy Tribe and Peter Elliott published the first issue of a new magazine, ORCRO. Quote, the occult response to the Christian response to the occult, set out to debunk the evangelical campaign, which indiscriminately linked ritual child abuse to any and every occult religion. Unfortunately, it quickly adopted the worst traits of its opponents, shoddy research and unsubstantiated prejudice. Quote, at the time of writing, April 1989, not one substantiated account of child abuse relating to what can legitimately be called occultism has been produced. Well, clearly that's not true. As we saw in chapter 4, there had been 5 successfully prosecuted cases of ritual abuse in Britain by the time that editorial appeared. 6 months later, far from having discovered its error, ORCRO was pleased to proclaim, quote, when ORCRO was founded, it was clear that many of the Christian experts' comments as regards occultism indicated that they were simply not experts on occultism, that their material was in many cases second-hand, inaccurate, misquoted, and in general so full of holes that one could have driven a bus through it. Court cases cited as examples of occult-related crime turned out to be no such thing. Promised court cases somehow never materialized and continue not to materialize. The explanation for this apparently perverse refusal to believe in the evidence of decided cases was to be found not in ORCRO itself, but in the increasingly hysterical ramblings of Christopher Bray, proprietor of Sorcerer's Apprentice, publisher of the Lamp of Thoth, and compiler of occult surveys. Bray's curiously twisted logic had led him to a profound revelation. Whilst it was true that some people committed serious criminal offences in the course of apparently satanic rituals, these merely proved that those responsible were not occultists, since occultists never committed offences. Therefore, the crimes could not have been occult-related or satanic because their perpetrators were not true occultists, QED. Instead, according to Bray, the whole satanic ritual abuse phenomenon was a sinister fundamentalist Christian conspiracy to stamp out other religions. A campaign that started in America and had been imported unquestioningly into Britain by a gullible press. Behind it all, apparently, was San Francisco police intelligence officer Sandy Gallant. Quote, Gallant's interest was both professional and religious. Applying her police after incident training to the imagined problem of ritual child sexual abuse, she found a ready-made professional audience willing to listen to her as spokesperson for the SFPD. Gallant's attempts to inflict upon the UK the same extreme of suppression foisted upon the USA succeeded. Using her material, Maureen Davies was able to link together the Christian fundamentalist network in the UK and manipulate the media throughout the whole of 1988 and 1989. Whether or not you believe this was a planned conspiracy or a subconscious one is irrelevant to the material results, which is that totally untrue allegations were used as a device by bigots to work against another religious belief. Perhaps the strident fantasies of Christopher Bray would not matter so much if he had not allowed his magazine to be used in 1988 as an unquestioning recruitment platform for two of the international satanic orders we examined in chapters 4 and 5, the Temple of Set and the Process Church of the Final Judgment. Bray has subsequently argued that he included their membership drives and with them contact addresses because he believed in giving his readers access to the full range of occult belief and opinion. Yet this is precisely the charge levelled against him and fellow occult businessmen by the likes of Maureen Davies and Diane Core. If Bray and his opposite numbers at ORCRO had genuinely wanted to protect the good names of most occult practitioners, they would have offered their help rather than bilious invective. The occult community is, almost by definition, a hidden one. Whilst most of what occurs behind its closely guarded doors is anodyne to the point of bland tedium, a proportion is not. The curious point about such occult evangelists as Christopher Bray is that he has tried to sweep the reality of ritual abuse further than ever from public view. To do so, he needed the help of the media, and in 1990, he got it. I wonder where Mr. Murdoch was in that. Ritual abuse and the media. It's a truism to say we get the press we deserve. It's nonetheless true. Until the latter part of the 1980s, reports of Satanism and bizarre ritual abuse were confined to the screaming headlines of the Sunday tabloids, under such banners as, quote, "My witchcraft made rock idol Erica Daddy, I used magic blood potion," or "Sex in field to make plants grow." Self-styled occultists made less than credible claims about smells, spells, and bells. Gradually, throughout the decade, these became rarer to be replaced by scarcely better documented claims from a handful of alleged ex-Satanists. Doreen Irvine and Marian Unsworth were amongst the first in Britain. Jackie Balodis and Cheryl Horton, their counterparts in the United States. Their stories, announced in 72-point type as, quote, "I saw teenage girl killed in a sacrifice to the devil," or, quote, "baby sacrificed to Satan," became standard gutter press fare. What they lacked in discernible detail, and they lacked a great deal, was made up for in gory colour. A common feature was that most had rejected the occult for one of Christianity's more evangelical subdivisions. This early generation of alleged adult survivor stories has been superseded by a small cottage industry devoted to churning out autobiographies of women who claim, on very slender evidence, to have been involved in satanic abuse and sacrifice. Like their forebears, these new survivor stories are almost without exception cynical and exploitative trash. This cheap and nasty journalism ensured one result above all else. When genuine ritual child abuse stories, stemming not from adults making uncheckable allegations, but from the tortured disclosures of toddlers and preschool victims, emerged in 1987, the cultural climate was set against them. Quote, I could never understand why we didn't get more interest from the press and media, Judith Dawson recalled in 1990. Quote, when I asked reporters, they said their editors found the subject too tacky or too much like the tabloid scare stories. The ritual abuse of children in Nottingham just wasn't going to be on the agenda for the national media. Again, I ask, where were the Murdochs in this? And Maxwell, Robert Maxwell. What the coverage needed was a new angle. It got one in 1988 and 1989, when previously respectable organizations like Child Watch and the Christian Church, albeit in the guise of the Evangelical Alliance, began issuing press releases, speaking at conferences, and doing their best to raise the temperature. But before long, journalists began asking to see some genuine evidence of what the campaigners had asked them to take on board, on trust. Maureen Davies was in something of a fix. Her information was, as ORCRO had rightly pointed out, frequently second-hand and rarely verified. Anyone with an axe to grind against the occult was guaranteed a sympathetic ear at reach out, provided they had a story to tell of drugs, death, or danger. By the summer of 1989, the honeymoon was over. The satanic ritual abuse phenomenon had once again been relegated to the bold headlines of the Sunday tabloids. If it was raised in the serious press, it was treated in a wry and knowing turn of phrase. Even the NSPCC, which I would add it was infiltrated, was widely criticised for having been duped. What brought the issue to some kind of life once again and ensured that the pendulum swung even further against understanding was a series of so-called dawn raids on a council estate in the Lancashire mill town of Rochdale during the long hot summer of 1990. The Mail on Sunday, never a paper perceived by social workers as one to support them in the perennial battle against sexual abuse, led the pack. Quote, they came and they snatched children. They ignored the screams and the yells. They were unmoved by the tears and the lamentations. They had timed their call for 7 a.m. All over a council estate in Rochdale, Lancashire, uniformed and plainclothes policemen, accompanied by social workers, went about their work. The date was June 14th. Let not only the people of Rochdale, but the rest of us too, not forget it easily. Behind this arch and melodramatic prose are the results of, quote, an investigation the paper had undertaken. 16 children were removed from 4 families on the estate in conditions of some secrecy. The cause was suspected satanic ritual abuse. The spur had been disclosures to social workers in the town by a 6-year-old boy. He told a now familiar story of having been locked in a cage witnessing strange ceremonies in which sheep were sacrificed by adults wearing white robes and hoods. He identified the other children who were present. It was these youngsters who were taken into temporary care. The boy's initial disclosures had been made to a teacher at his school. She had found him one day cowering in a cupboard, clearly and visibly distressed. In addition to the rituals involving sheep, he also described seeing a baby being born and then being killed, and graves being dug up and crosses burning in ceremonies. The teacher told Rochdale Social Services, and on the 28th of March, the boy was taken into temporary care under a place of safety order. The raid which took away the other children did not happen for another 3 months, months in which the boy's stories were assessed carefully. Rochdale's mistake was to attempt to keep the case under wraps. Despite having acted perfectly properly at this stage, the Social Services Department believed that it could avoid the attention of the media. It was wrong. The Mail on Sunday located the parents of the 6-year-old, whose tearful disclosures started the process. His mother confided in the reporter that it had all been her fault. She had let her son watch video nasties, horror films she named as The Evil and the Dead, Dungeons and Dragons, and The Boy Who Could Fly. Gratefully, the Mail on Sunday accepted this excuse and announced that the whole story had been a fantasy based on watching television. This was one of the arguments they tried to put forward with the Hampstead case. They said the children had watched The Mask of Zorro. Back to the text. There was one problem. None of the films mentioned contained any of the details the 6-year-old had given to Rochdale Social Services. Some of those details did, however, match known indicators of satanic ritual abuse. From September onwards, the media had what it wanted, a new angle. In truth, it was a reprise of the old Cleveland myth. Social workers as overzealous busybodies persecuting innocent families. And as in Cleveland, the Rochdale social workers would not allow the families even to know where their children were placed. Parents complained about being refused permission to send their offspring birthday presents or cards. The press gleefully reported each new heartrending story. What the reporters did not bother to discover, much less report, is that in cases of ritual abuse, it can be vital to isolate a child completely from the circumstances of the abuse. There is good evidence from law enforcement as well as from therapeutic analysis that offenders in such cases attempt to silence their victims by sending or delivering little reminders of what went on in the rituals. Often these have taken the form of birthday or greeting cards with an animal featured prominently on the front. To the untrained eye, they look as innocent as their manufacturers intended. For the ritual abuse victim, they can act as a subliminal trigger to revive past warnings about keeping quiet. There was one other difference between Rochdale and Cleveland. In the Lancashire town, the social workers had not gone to untrained lay magistrates asking for rubber-stamped care orders. They had placed decisions about the children in the hands of a senior High Court judge. Wardship orders were sought and most were granted, but only after the judge heard counsel for the families make out their case. Wardship, as we have seen, effectively stifles debate. With the Rochdale case now largely out of reach, the press began to look anew at the issue of ritual abuse itself. It did not like what it saw. The reporter most prominent that summer and autumn worked not for a sleazy tabloid, but for a supposedly respectable paper of record, The Independent, on Sunday. Rosie Waterhouse had joined the paper several months after a highly publicised dispute with her previous employers at the Sunday Times. There she had been just another young woman reporter. She had not delivered many memorable stories, and although she'd been offered details of the early stages of the Broxtowe case, when the children were taken into care before the disclosures of ritual abuse, she had not managed to get the item published. Waterhouse began investigating the origin of and evidence for the ritual abuse phenomenon. By August, she had become convinced that it was a fake. On the 12th of August 1990, she published a lengthy article under the headline, "The Making of a Satanic Myth." The story alleged that there had never been a proven case of ritual abuse, that the phenomenon was entirely the work of fundamentalist Christians who had imported bad research from the United States, which had undergone a similar witch hunt, and that the sole starting point of every story was the publication of Michel Remembers in 1980. Waterhouse complained, quote, "There have been police investigations across the United States, in Canada, the Netherlands, and now in Britain. They've produced no evidence, no bodies, no bones, no covens, no underground tunnels, no animal carcasses, no bloodstains, nothing." Any reporter can be wrong. Any writer can make a mistake. Waterhouse was wrong on all counts. As we have seen, there have been bodies and bones. There have been tunnels, mutilated dogs, and blood by the bucketful. All have been explicitly and judicially linked to Satanism. Nor was she finished. Between August and October, she published several more, quote, investigations, each purporting to show that ritual abuse did not exist and was a myth sustained by fervent and fundamentalist Christians. Now, when a journalist, quote unquote, is that dogged,
not based on fact. And I would refer you to, for instance, Melanie Abbott, about whom a lot of research was done with the BBC, Radio 4, and even possibly Victoria Derbyshire, the darling of so many BBC viewers. But when a reporter or journalist is that dogged in pursuing a narrative, one has to research into that journalist and their connections. I'll say that for now. Okay, every single article was grossly misleading. The Independent on Sunday refused to publish retractions. Wow. It ignored letters from therapists, psychiatrists, doctors, and the association formed to research the issue, RAINS, Ritual Abuse Information Network Support. Waterhouse refused to talk to anyone whose view opposed the paper's line. Instead, she made herself available for television chat shows. If she's still alive, look into her. The RAINS list, look that up. Spidercat web blog. Throughout the autumn, the Independent on Sunday created a new truth. Ritual abuse was a fantasy, a chimera, conjured up by hysterical social workers and improperly motivated priests. The NSPCC was singled out for a smear campaign. Waterhouse alleged that it had been responsible for brainwashing the Rochdale social workers. The NSPCC denied this. Anyone who attended any seminar on ritual abuse became de facto unreliable, their judgment clouded simply by listening to carefully presented workshops. The Nottingham social workers were not immune. Judith Dawson was once again under attack, and in an article for the New Statesman in October 1990, said, quote, "A contagion is spreading throughout the land, one that is ridiculous and insidious and dangerous. This contagion takes the comforting form of a skeptical and rational inquiry, and its message is comforting too. It is designed to protect, quote, innocent family life against a new urban myth of the satanic abuse of children, inspired by evangelical fundamentalists. Social workers are depicted as at once as all-powerful professional zealots who brainwash children into evil fantasies, and as credulous dupes who will believe ridiculous tales of witches, wizards, and inquisitorial tortures. But as long as they are discredited and the public remains on guard, the children will be safe. Will they? In just a few weeks, this contagion has demonstrated a devastating power that has deeply impressed the Nottingham team in which I work. For 3 years, we have worked with children who have been grossly abused, sexually and physically tortured in a context that would be difficult to describe other than as ritualized. During the past few weeks, our personal and professional reputations have been eroded. It is being said that we were influenced by our contacts with occult groups, but the children's disclosures came first. It really is totalitarian nonsense to imply that additional knowledge produces a closed mind. Dawson's private life and those of any other workers prepared to admit that they believed in ritual abuse became the subject of ill-informed speculation. Ray Wire was assumed to be a fundamentalist because he had once attended a theological college. One of Rochdale's counsellors on the Social Services Committee was condemned because he was openly homosexual. Dawson herself was accused of being part of the Christian conspiracy because she gave an interview to the Evangelical Alliance. She was forced to preface conversations with colleagues outside her authority with the declaration that she was not a believing Christian. Wow. A new witch hunt began in 1990, but this time it was professionals who were being hunted. One newspaper alone cannot create such a backlash, let alone the Independent on Sunday, which has the smallest circulation of all the quality Sunday press. But Waterhouse's articles were revealing. The allegations she made, the alleged, quote, facts she deployed, and even some of the phrases she used bore a remarkable similarity to those advanced in millions of leaflets mass-mailed by Christopher Bray and other occult campaigners. National newspapers were a major target. By the end of the summer, the campaign seemed to be working. Ritual abuse was deemed to be an unreliable in the first place, and more importantly, a distraction from the real problem of incest. The view of Melanie Phillips, social services commentator for the Guardian newspaper, was typical. Quote, "The first and most important point to make is this. The controversy over satanic practices is a monumental and dangerous irrelevance, a distraction from the banal, everyday reality of the emotional and physical abuse of children within some families, in which cruelty, neglect, rape, and buggery take place as part of a distressing perversion of family life. The second important point is that there has been no evidence." See, how can they report this and not be brought to task for this? "There has been no evidence of any satanic child abuse practices. It's all rumour and hearsay. What we do know is that these satanic allegations have only surfaced here in the last couple of years, following unsubstantiated claims made in the US. The previous decade, with all its efforts, all its cases, proven or suppressed, and all its hard-won understanding of the special needs of ritual abuse victims, might as well never have happened. There was no conspiracy among newspapers to snuff out the flickering flame of understanding in 1990. It happened through lazy reporting and an inability to listen to children's voices." Well, I would challenge that. I would say it might have been a conspiracy. But hindsight is 2020. But it had an effect. Social workers all over Britain once again put away their case files and ceased to talk about ritual abuse. Children went unprotected and uncounselled. And in Rochdale, ? Whatever the strengths of the original case, and there must have been some strength to have carried it through several interim hearings, Rochdale's social workers threw them away. Wow. Instead of taking specialist advice, they insisted on handling the alleged ritual abuse disclosures themselves. They then failed to record some of these disclosures properly. In a number of cases, the soundtrack to the videotape was so poor that the children's words were inaudible. In other cases, they breached clear practice rules by failing to keep notes or only turning on the tape after a disclosure had begun. Leading questions were asked and guidelines were flouted. When the case came before Mr. Justice Douglas Brown early in March 1991, the department's case was in tatters. Although 3 of the 17 children originally taken into care had been returned to their parents, the council was insistent that the remainder should not be allowed home. But its evidence was fatally flawed, even to the point that sworn affidavits were inaccurate or misleading. The judge ordered all but 4 of the remaining 14 children to be released at once and issued a swinging criticism of the social workers' inadequacies. Had Mr. Justice Brown left it at that, all might not have been lost. Although right to order the children home, he had no choice, given the department's handling of the case and a complete failure by Greater Manchester Police to come up with any corroborating evidence. His subsequent comments suggest that he departed from his own judicial duty to rely on empirical truth. And when you think about what went on to emerge from Rotherham, Rochdale, so many places, decades of organised abuse. The judge admitted that there was no way of knowing what the Rochdale children had seen which sparked their disclosures. Yet he allowed himself to be convinced that there was no satanic ritual abuse involved in the case. Similarly, he dismissed the social service department's claims that the children had been administered hallucinogenic drugs on the very weak grounds that no evidence had been found to indicate their parents were experienced drug users. Finally, he chose to accept the notion that all the disclosures of apparent ritual abuse and killing were the product of parents who had allowed their children to watch video nasties. that there was no evidence to support this other than the parents' own claims, and that none of the tapes contained scenes depicting any of the key indicators of satanic ritual abuse appeared to go by the wayside. Mr. Justice Douglas Brown should have known better. To criticise a social services department for contaminating and sabotaging its own evidence is one thing, but to come to specific and wide-ranging conclusions because that evidence was missing was very dangerous indeed. Justice Anna Portley as well. The result was predictable. The issue of satanic ritual abuse became once again derided as the fervid imaginings of social workers, overzealous in their desire to find devils in children's beds. The Rochdale case, botched as it was, should have taught the lesson that training and research was needed. Instead, it relaunched the myth that ritual abuse was a distracting mirage. Since the middle of 1990, a new orthodoxy had replaced reality. This new, quote, truth says that children are never abused in rituals, nor by Satanists, babies are not killed, nor toddlers tortured, drugs are not forcibly injected, nor body waste eaten under threats of death. None of this happens. Newspapers tell us all such stories are all beyond belief. And that's the end of chapter 8. And it's got so, I'm so grateful to Craig for sending me this because it's got so many, so relevant to what's going on or what's attempting to go on today. Angela Power Disney on YouTube and Facebook. AngelasCaches.org is my blog, no apostrophe, and Caches is spelled C-A-C-H-E-S. And if you can contribute in any way to my work, my costs, just my efforts as a semi-retired journalist, I'll put the link to a GoFundMe in the description box, along with chapter 1, which is not on the playlist. All the other chapters are. Thanks and God bless. Please pray for the children.